Hello and welcome to the Dwelling with the Shakers installment of our Virtual Tuesday Tour series. My name is Kyle Sandler and I'm the Education Coordinator for the Enfield Shaker Museum. Each of us creates our own aesthetic environment. We do this in all kinds of different ways. It could be our home furnishings, maybe the knickknacks in our grandmother's old hutch, photographs for our office desk, or even the layout of our own homes. For many of us, this past year has meant even more tinkering than usual, as we have learned to live in and create more pleasing and functional spaces in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just like people in 2021, the Enfield Shakers created their own aesthetic. While Shaker interior design was influenced by religious beliefs and community rules, it also reflected the shifts in vernacular style from the late 18th to the early 20th centuries. In this Virtual Tuesday tour, we're going to look at great stone dwelling retiring rooms and the items that were utilized in those spaces. Now on to retiring room 1. Welcome to Shaker retiring room number 1 on the second floor of the great stone dwelling. This is the first of 24 retiring rooms that you can find in this building. The great stone dwelling was first inhabited by the Enfield church family in the summer of 1841. Retiring room 1 is a great place to discuss the layout, design, and furnishings of these bedrooms. When walking in here, the first thing that jumps out at visitors is usually the built-in cabinetry. Behind me, you can see just one example of the many styles and designs you will find in the great stone dwelling. While the Shakers were not the only Americans to use built-ins, they used them on a much wider scale in Shaker structures than in their vernacular cousins. Most of the great stone dwelling rooms have built-in drawers and cabinets around the doorway and at least one interior wall. Brethren and sisters rooms were similar except for one crucial feature. The drawers are much larger in the sisters rooms than they are in the brothers. This detail makes a lot of sense given the extra space needed to store the sisters' clothing. Built-in cabinetry throughout the dwelling allowed spaces to remain tidy. They reduced the time required for cleaning surfaces, and they opened floor space. This last benefit was particularly important in the communal Shaker retiring rooms, where space was really at a premium, and rooms typically housed 3 to 4 people. When you moved into one of these bedrooms, you would typically be assigned a series of drawers, maybe some cabinet space like you'll find up here. Additionally, there was some built-in walk-in closet space off of each room, and we'll see one example of that when we head upstairs. But one really important detail in each of these built-in cabinets are these little chambers at the bottom here. Cleanliness was important in Shaker society, and the idea of having 100 chamber pots sitting out in the hallway every morning, given the challenges of getting to privies in the middle of the night, meant that the Shaker leadership had to come up with a more pragmatic solution. And what they did is, the Shakers designed these little chambers, and they're designed to hold chamber pots. If you were to open one of these up, just like this, you'll see metal sheeting on the inside that protects the wood. At the back is a vent that connects to one of 8 chimneys you find in the great stone dwelling. And so you would stuck the chamber pot in here. There's this nice little metal work here. It seals up just about airtight, and it would vent itself. And so this is a wonderful solution for a very practical problem and fits in well with the Shaker ideals of cleanliness and order. In addition to built-in cabinetry in each of the retiring rooms, another feature were built-in shutters. These built-in shutters, this is just one example of the many styles you can find in this building. They fold out like this nicely from the wall. And what these shutters really allow you to do is they allow you to get a little bit of extra insulation on cold winter days like the one we have right now where snow's falling from the sky. And so this extra layer of solid wood here is just going to break up a little bit of those winter drafts. There's roughly 180 windows in the great stone dwelling, and these single pane glass windows really do make for a cold space. And so I can really imagine a day, snowy day like today, where the Enfield Shakers would close all these shutters up to try to keep in some additional heat that would have been generated from the wood stoves we're going to talk about in just a second. So how did the Shakers in the Enfield church family who lived in the gray stone dwelling heat this building? How did they stay warm during the cold New Hampshire winters? The answer is wood stoves. The Shakers really are, in some ways, on the cutting edge pretty early. We know as early as 1815, they're bricking up fireplaces in the meeting house and replacing them with wood stoves. And this trend is going to continue throughout the rest of the 19th century as they adapt and change designs and try new wood stoves. The model of wood stove in front of me is a Shaker stove from roughly the 1840s, and this is the model that we see in a lot of interior photographs of this building, and we know they're using these very early on. Every retiring room had a stove like this. And there's some interesting features about this stove. It's a little bit different than the kind of wood stoves we're used to finding in our homes today, or many people use today. One detail that's really interesting is this drum on the top. This is called a superheater. And basically what a superheater is going to do is it's going to increase your surface area on the stove, and it's just going to produce a little bit more heat than if this stove just had straight pipes running up. Another interesting feature of this Shaker wood stove is the fairly tiny firebox. One of the most common things I hear from visitors is they're really surprised to see how small many of the Shaker stoves are. The fireboxes aren't particularly big. If you look at this one, you maybe could only fit a log or two in this at a time. Despite that, we know the Shakers are burning roughly 400 cords of wood per year to keep the church family warm. So that's probably about 1,200 cords of wood for the entire village. So to cut the trees, prep the wood, dry the wood, stack the wood is a major undertaking that would have involved the Shaker brethren, and really they're taking a lot of their time during those summer months where they would be able to get out into the far reaches of the Shaker property here. This wood stove during the Shaker times would have been located near the center of the room. The pipe would have run just along the ceiling here and would have connected right about here into the wall. The gray stone dwelling had 8 chimneys. One of those is just beyond this wall here. Now that we've discussed several elements of gray stone dwelling retiring rooms, I'd like to turn our attention away from some of the built-ins and the stoves to the furniture and other material culture items that one would have found in these rooms. Most of what we know about the furniture and other items in the gray stone dwelling retiring rooms comes from 3 separate sources. The first and possibly the most important of these sources is Hervey Elkin's 1853 account titled 15 Years in the Senior Order of the Shakers. In his book, former Enfield Shaker Hervey Elkins goes into extensive detail about the design and the layout of the gray stone dwelling, and he does not leave out the retiring rooms. And so he describes the different items that one would have found in these rooms. Another important source for research on the retiring rooms and the kind of pieces that we would have found in them is an 1841 version of the Shaker Community Rules that is specifically designed, and it's called out on the front page that it is for Canterbury and Enfield, so the New Hampshire bishopric. And in this document, there is extensive notes on what items should be found in a Shaker retiring room. The time of the document is kind of interesting. Of course, it's during the era of manifestations, but the gray stone dwelling is almost done in 1841, and the Shakers are going to move in for the first time that summer. So the document is definitely put out at a good time. Additionally, Canterbury Shaker Village, at their first dwelling house, had finished up an extensive renovation of their dwelling house only a few years earlier. So it does seem like this is a very timely document. Another important source for the design of these Enfield Shaker retiring rooms are historic photographs. We do not have as many interior historic photographs of the gray stone dwelling as we would like, but we do have some really high quality ones. And many of these are stereographed images that were taken in the 1870s through the very early 1880s. And what we find in these images are very eclectic retiring rooms that combine classic Shaker style, classic Shaker furniture, with Victorian Shaker pieces, and with many pieces that were purchased from the outside world. And what they show us really is that the Shaker design, the Shaker aesthetic is going through a transformative period where it is moving from the really classic descriptions that were left by Hervey Elkins to a more modern or more contemporary design of the 1870s through the 1890s. And so in just a moment, I'm going to take you through this room and I'm going to talk about some of the different pieces that are in this room that you would expect to have found in a retiring room in the gray stone dwelling. You can't have Shaker retiring rooms without beds for people to sleep in. In a room of this size, we typically have about 4 people, so you'd have 4. The ideal was to have 4 individual beds, though that wasn't always the case in the Shaker world. Both Hervey Elkins and the Holy Orders of 1841 for Canterbury and Enfield tell us that the ideal is 4 beds to be painted green, and there are several examples of these in various Shaker collections. The bed behind me is a totally different animal. This is an example of Victorian Shaker. This bed has a strong connection to the last Enfield brother. His name was Franklin Young, and Brother Franklin lived on the 2nd floor of the Brethren's West Shop. He had an apartment over there, and we know he liked this kind of Victorian furniture. And while we don't think Brother Franklin made this bed does have a strong connection to him and left the community not too long before its close in 1923. One of the pieces that would have been found in great stone dwelling retiring rooms are washstands. A washstand is a classic piece, functional. There would have been additional storage in this cabinet underneath, but basically this is just an example of the importance of cleanliness in a Shaker village. Unlike the washstand, Hervey specifically mentions work tables or desks in his account. This is a perfect example of a work table. It's the classic Enfield style. It's got a ring turning where the leg goes from the round to the block, and it's just a functional piece. Work tables were used in all kinds of spaces throughout Shaker village, but they were also a very popular piece for their vernacular neighbors as well. And really, when you look at kind of classic American furniture from the late 18th and 19th centuries, work tables are among the most common. They function for desks, as desks for writing, they function for sewing tables. It was just an all-around solid piece that could be relied on as one of the few pieces of furniture that you would have found in the Shaker retiring room. A gray stone dwelling retiring room wouldn't be complete without the classic Enfield chair. Now, I'm not really going to go into a lot of detail right now about what are the characteristics of an Enfield chair, but one thing I want to call out that's really interesting when you look at the historical record about gray stone dwelling retiring rooms is you have 2 kind of very contradictory views of how chairs should be seated in the Enfield Shaker village. You look at Hervey Elkins' 1853 account, and he clearly discusses how in an Enfield retiring room, your chairs would either have a rush or a rattan cane seat. On the other hand, though, the Holy Orders of 1841 with extracts adapted to Canterbury and Enfield clearly state, or they encourage, the use of either a list seat, so a chair tape seat, or a cattail rush seat. They just actively discourage the use of cane. And so it's kind of interesting when you look at the historical records and you look at the community rules, you have to constantly think about whether these rules were actually enforced, whether they were actually used in the Shaker village. And we know that in the Shaker world, things are so different from community to community and even from Shaker family to Shaker family. So this is just one example of the Enfield Shakers kind of adapting the rules, or maybe in this case, even slightly ignoring the rules to work better for what they need in the community. Hervey himself really talks up the cane seat because of how light it makes the chair. And that is just a very functional thing, especially when you are living in a building like the Great Stone Dwelling where you have 6 floors and you're carrying pieces of furniture around. It's really nice to have this light rattan cane seated chair. One last piece of furniture I'd like to talk about before we go to the last stop on this virtual Tuesday tour is this blanket box, or blanket chest. Blanket boxes were a common piece of furniture in the Enfield Shaker village, but not necessarily in the Great Stone Dwelling. We have 2 accounts, 2 historical accounts that seem to hint at the fact that maybe this was not the kind of piece you would have found in this building. The first of these is an 1843 account written by Elder Giles Avery of New Lebanon. And in this account, Elder Avery talks about the fact that the rooms in the Greystone dwelling were pretty much open. There was not a lot of furniture to take up floor space, and he specifically mentions that there wasn't anything to bump into. His account from 1843 seems to be backed up by a later 1854 account in a journal kept by a Western ministry. And in this account, they talk about a conversation they had with Elder Orville Dyer of the Enfield Church family. And in this account, Elder Orville describes how there are no blanket chests located in the Greystone dwelling. Now, of course, we can never know this for sure, but it's an interesting account, and it tells us a little bit more about the thought behind the built-in cabinetry and the setup of this very large structure. Welcome to the last stop on our virtual Tuesday tour. We're now up on the 4th floor of the Greystone dwelling. Most of the retiring rooms in the Greystone dwelling would have been located on the 3rd and 4th floors. There were 8 bedrooms on each floor. Half of the floor would have been for the brothers, half of the floor would have been for the sisters in the community. And just behind me is an example of what the Shakers refer to as a press or a clothes press. Today we would call these walk-in closets. Each room was able to access a walk-in closet. These walk-in closets were typically about 10 feet by 10 feet. On either wall, there was a set of peg rails for hanging things. Every clothes press also had a full-size window to provide ample light into this narrow space. At the very end of the press, or the end of these walk-in closets, you had this large collection of built-in drawers. The example you can see in front of you is one that has been restored and shows what the layout would have been for these Greystone dwelling clothes presses. And so what did they use all these drawers for? Primarily they used it for storing clothes. For every 2 retiring rooms, you had a clothes press, a walk-in closet. And so you would have had anywhere from 6 to 8 Shakers using this space to store their clothing. And then every couple of months, as the seasons changed, they would take all the clothes out of here, they would bring it up to the attic of the Greystone dwelling, and then they would bring down more seasonally appropriate clothes and load them right back in here. Thank you for tuning into this installment of our Virtual Tuesday Tour series. If you'd like to learn more about the Enfield Shakers and their legacy, please visit us at shakermuseum.org.